Hello, I'm Melody Pash, Dream Diva, and we're here to explore the messages in your dreams and how they affect your everyday life. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to this episode of Dream Diva, and I have a really incredible friend with me named Laurie Morris Goddu, and she and I have been friends for a long time. She is in Kansas City. We're in Kansas City today. You might see that on my shirt. Modality. I know that you're very prophetic, so you have an intuitive gift that you work with, and you connect with Creator in different ways, looking for what's going on, and you engage your clientele with that. Tell me sort of where your basis is and sort of what you work out of, because we all do it differently. So you're more biblically based, right? In sort of all of your modality and in the way you work. So you might give me just a short blip on how that works for you.
Yeah, if somebody says that they're stuck in a place and they can't seem to get a different mindset or feel free from something, and particularly like a sexual addiction or tormenting playbacks of the past, even could have PTSD, I have them fill out a questionnaire that gives me history on their family of origin.
Oh, great.
Because the family imprint is very important to us, not just the individual events of trauma, but what our imprint was living in the home. If we were a latchkey kid and then had trauma, it's going to impact us differently than if we had a healthy, loving home. Because your identity is formed in the continuity of the family structure and safety. If that's absent, your identity is weaker, and when you get an event-oriented trauma, it impacts you in a stronger way. There's all kinds of other factors that play in, but what I do is get that history, and then I formulate questions and dialogue between me and my client to talk to God, the Creator, about. Because if He's the Creator, He knows the answer to our questions, and He'll talk to us. And I just believe that with all my heart. I've seen it with all kinds of people, every walk of life. If we ask Him something, He likes to respond. And so if we can get, my goal, if you will, in my time is for the person sitting in front of me to get a different perspective on their pain than they've had, either of themselves or the person that hurt them or both. And they get that from God's overarching view, the Creator's view of life. And once they get that change of perspective, often what happens is there is a total ability to receive something different about the way they saw themselves or someone else. And they shift into a new mindset, and then they practice, several weeks of receiving that and partnering with that truth. And then they feel like a different person. They can live differently. They don't just feel differently, they can live differently.
Right. So it's really all about finding the root of the lie and whatever that's been affecting
core belief
them.
systems. Wrong mindsets. Even I could sit here with you and have a different perspective on you. You might say, oh, yeah. I say, you're beautiful, Mel. And you're like, thanks. And I know just how far that went in. But I'm looking at you going, God, she's gorgeous. But your mindset may not be able to go there because of your past wounding. And so, me saying that isn't enough. But if you hear God, the Creator, say, wow, you're gorgeous, it's going to mean something. And then you can receive what I have to say.
Right. Wow, that's really good. And, that happens for a lot of us, where we people will tell us something and we want to believe it. I want to believe, that God thinks I'm beautiful or that you think I'm beautiful. But the reality is that's really hard for us sometimes.
We deflect a lot.
Right, we do. Absolutely. Yeah. What are some of the other obstacles that would come out of sexual abuse that you've come up against?
Blockages in communication with hearing, God talk to them. Okay. Sometimes coping mechanisms like cutting themselves, causing pain, overeating, overspending. Some of the biggest ones I see are self-harm, self-hatred, and overeating. Those are the most common in the world that I've lived in with the clients I've had. It also often projects into very shame-based looking. I'm the one who's bad. There's something wrong with me. I'm at fault. And so very, like I described myself earlier, apologizing a lot, not being able to set boundaries, not being able to speak up for yourself.
Oh, wow.
So
loss of a voice.
Loss of a voice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really good. Yeah, I have known you for a long time, and you've sent me a couple of dreams that your clientele had, and it was interesting going through some of that, sort of looking at what was going on. Do you have a lot of situations where things will come up there where you feel like creators speaking in dreams, or in a place of more their subconscious level where things are coming up, and then that's sort of a clue for you in sessions?
Yes. In fact, it's one of the questions I ask every time I work with someone, and it's more than an hour and a half. If it's 2.5 hours or longer, I do different types of session lengths.
Okay.
And every time there's an intensive of any kind, that is one of the questions. What dreams have you had this week? Because I'm expecting, if you come intentionally engaging with me, with the idea you want to look at an issue and you want it to change, and there's a creator who's talking, why would he not talk about it?
Right.
And one of the ways he talks is with dreams. And I have gotten clues. I've had clues about mindsets, clues about things they haven't seen through dreams. I've actually had people recover memories they didn't have. That's not very common, but I've had it happen a couple of times.
Oh, that's huge. I could see how that would work, though. Absolutely.
It started in there. I said, give yourself and your body permission to remember. If you're ready, ask, yourself and God if you're ready. And then they did. And these two different women started having dreams.
Wow. Incredible.
Now you still have to choose to believe the dreams, which was the next step.
Okay. So, Laurie, would you mind sharing some of your own experiences, if you wouldn't mind, about some of the healing that you've been through? And I would like to sort of stay in the vein with some of the sexual abuse. So we will go there.
Cool. I actually love working with trauma, and particularly sexual trauma, sexual brokenness that people have gone through, whether it's been they have been sexually abused, or they've abused someone else, or they've been raped, or there's been voyeurism in the home. And so what I work out of my own journey, and my own journey was that my late husband, David Morris, and I were married 21 years. We were pastors and worship leaders, traveled the world teaching and speaking on worship, and looked glorious to lots of people. Because he was a really dynamic guy, an amazing musician and man of God. But he was deeply wounded from childhood sexual abuse, starting at a very young age, the age of 3.
Wow.
And it was within the church, and it was not uncovered. And so he lived with his sexual brokenness and brought that into our marriage. And so his response to his coping for his pain and trying to get comfort and find his identity, he did through acting out with homosexuality. And so in our marriage, he was unfaithful multiple times, and we walked restoratively through stepping down from ministry, being restored to ministry. We did counseling with people, received counseling ourselves. So the journey is very personal. I go over the highlights of that journey in my book, Shattered and Then. But honestly,
is that a book that they can get on Amazon?
Yes, it is on Amazon, Shattered and Then by Laurie Morris. That overviews a lot more than just our story, but our entire family story and journey, and the things the Holy Spirit taught me in that place. So I minister out of a place of my own healing journey and having to walk through difficult places and forgiveness, and how do you restore trust when you've been betrayed like that, and how do you get to the core root system that's driving the behaviors? Because different people act out in different ways. Some it's with promiscuity, some it's with sexual addictions to porn or pornographic type literature, some it's to masturbation, some it's to being licentious or loose with other people, and just the thrill of overcoming or defeating, someone. There's all kinds of ways. And
this sort of brings me up to the other question I was going to ask, which I guess you could address that maybe on your late husband's behalf, but what those broken pieces, those fragmentations look like, so that people might discover and be able to acknowledge their own broken pieces.
Yep, that's a great question. It's loaded. I hope I can do
it. Well, give us the bottom line.
David's brokenness was extreme because of the amount of trauma, and it was multiple times that he was assaulted by a male because of the length of time that he kept it a secret. His brokenness wasn't just acting out homosexually, but he actually shattered into a bunch of parts, was clinically diagnosed with a disorder called dissociative identity disorder.
Okay.
And so he created different personalities to cope with his pain. That was also part of our healing journey, and a unique one being in the ministry and dealing with that, finding out it wasn't a demon. And
so in the middle of this, you guys you're actually involved, not only engaged, but you're involved in leadership in the traditional church.
Yes,
okay.
That is correct.
Wow.
And we had amazing leaders who walked with us. This wouldn't have been possible just because we were willing to look at our stuff or because we were being active. This was because of the people who surround us, who had been in relationship with us for years.
Right.
And they were kind, they were supportive, they may not have understood always, but they were willing to walk with us until we got to the root. And I keep saying the root. To me, our emotional trauma has a root bed system.
Okay.
And so we have behaviors out here in the present that are related to old traumas back here that we may not connect, because the trauma looks different than our trauma now. But if the emotional content is the same, if I felt shame back here as a child, and now I'm feeling shamed here in the present, but it's for a totally different reason. This was sexual abuse, and this is just an embarrassing moment. I can have the same emotional response and be triggered
by that trigger.
And so learning other people's brokenness. Some people's is not that extreme. In fact, I speak on and encourage lay people on understanding dissociation. The mechanism of dissociation is a brain mechanism to survive trauma. Sure. And it is not just a mental assent. The brain is so beautifully made by God that it can literally create something that feels like reality that isn't really there.
Wow.
And it's not hallucinatory. It's not like in the context of schizophrenia. It's very much just, I'm going to make my world safe. So I'm going to go somewhere else and be somebody else, or I'm going to lock down my pain. I dissociated very well in my journey when my dad suddenly died and I was 12 years old and he was 38.
Wow.
And we weren't allowed to grieve. And my dissociation looked like this lid that I just shut down all my emotions and with it, my memories.
Oh,
so my memories were very surface, like this is what we did in the summer. And this is what it looked like, but nothing specific stayed.
And you couldn't go into any deep detail.
Nope, and I couldn't connect emotionally, and that lasted 25 years.
Oh my gosh.
So dissociation is this amazing system God put in our bodies to cover, or not cover, it's not the word I want, to cope with trauma. To cope with trauma and process it. But he never intends for us to live there the rest of our days.
But it's not a bad thing.
No.
It is what he has given us
so
that we can learn to cope, and then we can engage with kind of what the situation is, and then get some healing and move on.
The idea is that according to Colossians in the Bible, there's places that God wants us to be whole in him. And so if we're created to be whole, and we're fractured or stuff is buried, that's really not living out of our whole self.
Right.
And my belief is you want to live out of your whole self. You want to live out of who you were created to be. And if I have compartmentalized these places, well, I'll look at everything but this, or these two things can't be looked at. That was too painful. I'm not really living out of everything that I was created to be, because I believe that we learn and grow and get healed from those hard places, and they make us compassionate people. They make us empathetic. They give us patience with others.
I noticed that on your site, there is a statement that is very intriguing, which is, out of our brokenness springs hope and new life. So I'm wondering, in that place where we sort of compare ourselves to everybody else, we look at everybody else and say, oh, well, she has everything. I can look at Laurie and say, oh, she has everything together, right? Of course, you've been through lots of work and lots of healing. But I can look in the mirror and say, well, I'm a complete mess, and I don't want anybody to see that mess. And I would not believe. So what might be the root that would be connected to, I don't believe that anything in me could foster or cultivate some good outcome. Does that make sense?
Yes, and it's shame. Shame is talking.
Okay.
Shame is at the core of everyone, and I lived there for years, even though I was a good person and the good girl, and I tried to do everything right that I thought would bless other people and make them happy. I still felt inherently like there was something wrong with me, and I did everything I could to hide that through performance, through working really hard. But I never felt completely known or accepted by others. It took me a lot of years. In fact, my husband had passed on by the time I started looking at this in my mid-40s. And I was so afraid to see the shame. Shame says there's something wrong with me. Shame says I'm different. Shame says I'm not worthy. Shame says, that's why I knew immediately what it was. Your question, it's easy. Shame is just there. It's in every culture. I've traveled the world, and it's there in different cultures even more prolifically, really strongly in some of the Asian cultures. But it just says, I have to prove I'm okay. I can't just be who I am, because that could be rejected.
Right. And if you don't believe that you're okay, then why would you want someone to see the fullness of who you are? Yes. Because then they see that brokenness and that place of transparency. Well, that's a vulnerable place.
It is.
And that's a scary
it leads
place.
To fear. Scary. Scary is the word. And I know from personal experience that my shame kept me living in fear, to the point I would go and check in on people if their face looked funny at me that day that I'd seen all week long, but suddenly they, and I'd think, it's me. I've done something wrong.
Oh, wow.
And I would go up and go, hey, are we okay? Is everything okay? I mean, horribly apologetic. And talk
like
about
taking everything on yourself.
Yes. This would be another fractured, broken place.
Okay.
Now, I didn't have parts, but there was this part of me that always was apologizing. And that's another way that our brokenness can show up, demonstrate itself, display itself,
right.
And always apologizing, always checking in. What have I done wrong? Have I done something wrong? Are we okay? Because I was always on alert, because trauma puts us in this place of high alert and fight, flight in our body and our brains. And once we've experienced trauma and it hasn't been resolved and there hasn't been healing, we kind of are waiting for the next thing. We're like this,
right.
When's it going to come? What's it going to look like?
Right. What does wholeness look like? How do you know you have arrived there? And do you ever get there?
That's a great question.
Isn't it?
This is just my measly little perspective. But I think that we live in wholeness when we live out of, speak out of, respond out of who we really are, and not what we think we're supposed to be. And
so that place of authenticity?
Authenticity.
Okay.
And genuineness. Now, there are times that I'm a very genuine person, and I'm very authentic and vulnerable, but I don't necessarily see myself as whole. But when I live from the attitude of that authenticity, it feels very whole and very real. It's definitely not about perfection. I don't think we'll ever get there. And it's definitely Not something I'm sure we arrive at.
Okay.
I think it's a lifelong process of walking into the wholeness of the reality of we are uniquely, individually loved and accepted, and there's nobody else like us. And there's nobody, even if they had the same gifts, even with twins and the same DNA, I believe there's a uniqueness to how they are seen and how they demonstrate who they are.
Yeah. Wow, that is really good. Well, we're in Kansas City, so if you're in Kansas City, Laurie is actually here or anywhere in the area. I'm sure you could connect with her. However, you can do these her connectivity sessions with her via Skype.
Via
That
Skype,
would be
yes.
right.
Skype or FaceTime.
Or FaceTime. Remember that her site is hismosaic.com, so you're going to want to check her out, Ms. Laurie Morris Goddu. And I'm so glad that you joined us today, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks, Laurie, for being with us. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm glad we got to have some time together.
Me too.
So cool. I love you.
Love you too.